In the shadowed valleys of ancient Thrace, where the wind carries whispers of forgotten songs and the mountains echo with the memory of divine music, there once lived a man whose voice could move the very stones of the earth. This is the story of Orpheus, the greatest musician who ever drew breath, and of a love so profound that it would challenge the natural order of life and death itself. The blood of gods flowed through Orpheus's veins, for he was the son of Apollo, the radiant deity of music, poetry, and the sun. From his divine father, Orpheus inherited a gift that transcended mortal understanding. When he sang, the trees would uproot themselves to follow his voice, wild beasts would lie down peacefully at his feet, and even the rushing rivers would pause their eternal journey to the sea. But it was not from Apollo alone that Orpheus received his extraordinary talents. His mother was Calliope, the most revered of the 9 muses, she who presided over epic poetry and eloquence. From her, he inherited the power to weave words into melodies that could touch the deepest chambers of any heart, mortal or divine. The lyre that Orpheus carried was no ordinary instrument. Crafted by the hands of Hermes himself and blessed by Apollo, its 7 strings were said to mirror the harmony of the celestial spheres. When Orpheus played, the music did not merely fill the air, it transformed reality itself, bending the laws of nature to its ethereal will. Throughout the land, tales spread of the young man whose music could heal the sick, calm the storm-tossed seas, and bring peace to warring armies. Kings and commoners alike would travel vast distances merely to hear a single note from his divine lyre. Yet for all his fame and the reverence he commanded, Orpheus remained solitary, his heart untouched by romantic love. That changed on a golden morning when he first laid eyes upon Eurydice. She was a wood nymph, a dryad whose beauty rivaled that of Aphrodite herself. Her hair flowed like liquid amber in the dappled sunlight, and her eyes held the depth of ancient forests. When she danced through the groves, flowers bloomed in her footsteps, and even the stern oak trees would bend their mighty branches to catch a glimpse of her grace. The moment Orpheus saw Eurydice, his divine song faltered for the first time in his life. His lyre slipped from his hands, its strings humming with a new melody, the song of love that had awakened in his heart. Eurydice, too, felt the pull of destiny when she heard his voice calling her name across the woodland clearing. Their courtship was a symphony of perfect harmony. Orpheus would sing to her beneath the silver moon, his voice weaving tales of their future together. Eurydice would dance to his melodies, her movements creating visual poetry that complemented his musical verses. The very forest seemed to celebrate their union, with nightingales providing accompaniment and fireflies illuminating their romantic encounters. When Orpheus asked for her hand in marriage, Eurydice accepted without hesitation. Their wedding day was set to be the most magnificent celebration the ancient world had ever witnessed. Gods would descend from Olympus, nymphs would emerge from their hidden groves, and the music of Orpheus would bless their union with divine approval. The wedding ceremony began at dawn, with Orpheus playing a melody so beautiful that it seemed to capture the very essence of love itself. Eurydice appeared like a vision in flowing white robes, adorned with wildflowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The couple stood beneath an arch of intertwined branches as the priest began the ancient vows. But even in their moment of supreme joy, fate had already set in motion the tragedy that would define their legend. As the celebration reached its peak, Eurydice, radiant in her happiness, wandered away from the crowd to gather flowers for her bridal crown. She moved through the tall grass of a meadow, her laughter echoing like silver bells across the landscape. Hidden in that very grass lay a viper, its scales black as midnight and its fangs dripping with venom deadly enough to fell even the immortal children of the gods. As Eurydice stepped lightly through the meadow, her bare foot came down upon the serpent's coiled form. The snake's strike was swift as lightning. The venom pierced her divine essence immediately. Fire raced through her veins as the poison attacked her very life force. Eurydice's joyous laughter turned to a cry of pain that cut through the wedding festivities. Like a blade, guests turned in horror as they saw the bride collapse, her wedding dress billowing around her like white wings. Orpheus reached her side within moments, gathering her into his arms as the deadly poison completed its work. He tried desperately to sing her back to health, his voice pouring all of his divine power into melodies of healing and restoration. But even his miraculous music had limits, and the venom that coursed through her veins was beyond any earthly remedy. As the sun set on what should have been the happiest day of their lives, Eurydice drew her final breath in her husband's arms. Her hand grew cold in his grasp, and her eyes, which had sparkled with such life and love, closed forever. The forest itself seemed to mourn her passing, with flowers withering and streams falling silent in sympathetic grief. For 7 days and 7 nights, Orpheus refused to leave Eurydice's side. He sang to her lifeless form, hoping against hope that his music might call her spirit back from whatever realm it had entered. But death, the great equalizer, had claimed her absolutely, and no mortal power could reverse its decree. On the 8th day, as despair threatened to consume him entirely, Orpheus made a decision that would echo through the ages. If he could not bring Eurydice back to the world of the living, then he would descend to the realm of the dead and petition Hades himself for her return. The entrance to the underworld lay hidden in a cave deep beneath the earth, guarded by monsters and shrouded in eternal darkness. No living soul had ever made the journey and returned to tell the tale. But love had made Orpheus bold beyond reason, and he began his descent into the depths of the earth. The path wound through caverns filled with the echoes of ancient sorrows. At the banks of the river Styx, Orpheus encountered Charon, the grim ferryman who had never carried a living passenger. When the musician began to play, his melody was so beautiful that even the ancient ferryman's heart was moved to pity, and he agreed to ferry Orpheus across the dark waters. Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, stood sentinel at the gates of the dead. The beast had never allowed a living soul to pass, but as Orpheus approached playing a melody of such sweetness and sorrow, even Cerberus was moved. The great hound's growls softened to whimpers, and he lay down peacefully, allowing the musician to pass. Beyond the gates lay the true realm of the dead, where Orpheus encountered the souls of legendary heroes and common folk alike. Even the Furies, those terrible goddesses of vengeance, paused in their eternal pursuit of wrongdoers to listen to his song. The tormented souls who suffered eternal punishments found momentary peace in his music. At last, Orpheus reached the throne room of Hades himself, where the king and queen of the dead sat on thrones of black marble. Hades was a god who had heard every plea and refused them all. For the natural order demanded that the living and the dead remain forever separate. But Orpheus offered no arguments or bargains. Instead, he simply began to sing. His voice rose through the vast throne room, carrying with it all the love he felt for Eurydice, all the grief of their separation, and all the hope that somehow love might prove stronger than death itself. The song told their story, their meeting, their courtship, their wedding day, and the tragic accident that had torn them apart. It was not a demand, but simply the honest expression of a heart broken by loss. As Orpheus sang, Persephone began to weep, her own memories of separation stirring within her divine heart. Even Hades felt his heart stirring with uncharacteristic emotion. The music reached into the deepest chambers of his divine essence, awakening memories of his own love for Persephone. When the last notes faded into silence, the throne room remained hushed for a long moment. Then Hades spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. He had been moved by the music, and for the first time in his eternal reign, he was prepared to make an exception to the laws of death. Eurydice would be returned to life, but there would be conditions that would test the very love that had brought Orpheus so far. Orpheus would be allowed to lead Eurydice back through the underworld to the surface of the earth. But during the entire journey, he must not look back at her, must not turn to see if she truly followed behind him. Only when they both stood once more in the sunlight would she be fully restored to life. Eurydice's spirit was summoned forth from among the countless dead, her form translucent but recognizable. She reached out toward Orpheus with longing, but was warned that she too must not touch him until they reached the world above. The reunion they both craved would have to wait, and so began the most difficult journey of Orpheus's life. Step by step, he retraced his path through the underworld, his lyre silent now, all his concentration focused on moving forward without looking back. Behind him, he could hear the soft whisper of footsteps that he desperately hoped belonged to Eurydice. The return journey seemed to take an eternity. Every shadow made Orpheus question whether his wife truly followed. Every echo might have been her voice calling his name. The temptation to turn and look grew stronger with each step, but he held firm to his faith in Hades' promise. Past the sleeping Cerberus they walked, across the river Styx in Charon's boat, up through the winding caverns, toward the distant gleam of daylight that marked the entrance to the world above. As they climbed higher, Orpheus began to feel hope stirring in his chest once more. But as the entrance to the cave came into view, doubt began to gnaw at his mind. The footsteps behind him had grown so faint that he could barely detect them. What if Hades had deceived him? What if he climbed alone while believing his wife followed? The sunlight streaming through the cave entrance was now bright enough to illuminate the path ahead. Just a few more steps, and they would both be free. But the silence behind him had become complete, and fear overwhelmed faith in Orpheus's heart. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Orpheus turned to look behind him. For one brief, wonderful moment, he saw Eurydice there, her form becoming more solid as the sunlight touched her. She smiled at him with infinite love and reached out her hand toward his. But they had not yet both stepped into the light of day. Eurydice was still technically within the bounds of the underworld when Orpheus broke the conditions of their agreement. Even as he reached for her, she began to fade, her form becoming translucent once more. Her eyes filled with sadness and understanding as she realized what had happened. There was no anger in her gaze, only compassion for the husband who had risked everything to save her. With her last breath as a shade-granted temporary substance, she whispered words of forgiveness and eternal love. Then she was gone, drawn back into the depths of the underworld by forces beyond mortal control. This time, the separation was final. Hades's mercy had been exhausted, and no second chance would be granted. Orpheus had achieved the impossible, only to lose everything in the final moment. Orpheus stood alone at the mouth of the cave, his hands still stretched out toward empty air. The sunlight that should have brought joy felt cold and mocking upon his skin. He had been so close to victory, only to have it all slip away through his own human weakness. The return to the world of the living held no joy for Orpheus now. His music became a constant lament for his lost love. The songs that flowed from his lyre spoke only of grief and longing, of opportunities missed and love lost forever. For years, Orpheus wandered the wilderness, spurning the company of mortals and rejecting the advances of nymphs and goddesses alike. His heart belonged eternally to Eurydice, and no other love could fill the void her absence had created. The women of Phris, followers of Dionysus, grew angry at Orpheus's rejection of their affections. During one of their frenzied rituals, they fell upon him in their madness, tearing him apart in a fury of jealousy and divine intoxication. As Orpheus died, his head and lyre were thrown into the river, but even in death, his voice continued to sing Eurydice's name. The head floated downstream, still lamenting, until it came to rest on the shores of Lesbos, where it would inspire generations of poets and musicians. His soul, finally freed from the constraints of mortal flesh, descended once more to the underworld. This time, there was no bargaining with death, no conditions to fulfill. Orpheus was now a shade among shades, and the natural order had been restored. In the fields of Asphodel, Orpheus found Eurydice waiting for him. No longer bound by the laws that separated the living from the dead, they could finally embrace without fear or restriction. Their reunion was everything they had dreamed it would be during their brief time as mortals. Now they walked together through the eternal twilight of the underworld, hand in hand, never to be parted again. Orpheus sings to her still, but his songs are no longer filled with grief and longing. Instead, they celebrate a love that proves stronger than death itself. The myth of Orpheus and Eurydice endures as one of humanity's most powerful meditations on the nature of love and loss. It speaks to the universal experience of grief, the desperation that drives us to impossible lengths to recover what we have lost, and the tragic irony that sometimes our very love becomes the instrument of our undoing. Their story reminds us that true love requires faith and trust. Orpheus's failure was not in loving too little, but in loving with too much desperation, allowing fear to override the faith that had brought him so far. Yet the tale is not ultimately one of failure, but of triumph. For while Orpheus lost Eurydice twice in the mortal world, Their love achieved something that even the gods recognized as sacred. Their devotion moved the unmovable, softened hearts of stone, and proved that some bonds are indeed eternal. In death, they found what life had denied them, a love untroubled by fear, unbroken by fate, enduring beyond the reach of accident or divine interference. Their tragedy became their triumph, their separation the very thing that secured their eternal unity. And so the song of Orpheus continues to echo through the ages, not as a lament for what was lost, but as a celebration of what endures. In every love song, in every poem of longing, in every heart that refuses to let go of what it cherishes most, the spirit of Orpheus and Eurydice lives on, proving that some stories are too powerful to die, some loves too profound to be forgotten.